everything that happened many, many years ago should be mentioned so that the people know what actually happened and how we overcame a lot of difficulties to win the war and get back to peace.
Frank, welcome, and it's nice to see you.
Good morning to you and to your audience.
Thank you. And Frank, guys, you can see is joined by his daughter, Carolyn. She'll help out if Frank has trouble hearing or anything like that. But students, I know you're going to speak nice and clearly and loudly when I call on you to ask a question. And Frank, I'll ask the first one, a really, really straightforward one. I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself and tell us when and where you were born.
Okay, my name is Frank J. Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R. I was born on the day of January 22nd, 1927. And in the city of Pittsburgh, on the section called the 27th Ward, the north side of Pittsburgh.
And my students are aware of Pittsburgh. We talked an awful lot about the war effort and the factories and industry. Yes. So of course they know that Pittsburgh is very famous for the steel industry and what an important role that played during the war. So Frank, like I explained to you before, I'll call on the students to ask the questions. Sometimes there might be a little pause, so hopefully we'll get good connections from everybody today. So Emma, why don't we start with you? And Emma, if you could go ahead and ask question number 2, please.
Okay.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could please tell us about your family and early life.
I was born in the city of Pittsburgh on the 22nd of January, 1927, and in the city of Pittsburgh. And my dad was in World War I, and he died the 27th of December, 1934. And I grew up with my mother's family, my grandpap and grandmother, 3 uncles, and an aunt. We had to move, and we went to live with them. And I had a great relationship with everybody. I was treated 100% great. And I remember that we had a wagon with steel wheels, and we would go up to this big hill called Turman Avenue, and there was a fruit farm. They had apple trees and pear trees, and you couldn't take the fruit off the limbs of the tree, but everything that fell on the ground you could take, and we would go up with a wagon that had steel wheels with it and load it up with apples and pears. And I enjoyed my childhood. My mother's family and uncles and aunts treated me 100%. My mother was pregnant with my brother when my dad died, and my brother was born. My dad died December 27th, 1934. My brother was born 9th of January, 1935. And then we went to live with my grandpap and grandma. in their bay. They had a big house, and we were all there, and it was a great experience.
Very good. Nicely answered. And Frank, I hope when you went up to that tree to get the apples and pears, you only got the ones on the ground. You would never shake the tree and make the fruit fall, would you?
No, no, I wasn't that way.
Very good. So now we'll have Rob ask a question. Rob, if you could go ahead and ask number 3.
Hi, where did you go to school?
I went to a Catholic grade school from 1st grade to the 8th grade. And then I went to a Catholic high school for my freshman, sophomore, 3rd and 4th year. And I graduated from North Catholic High School. I was in the 2nd graduating class that graduated from that school. And then I worked, and then I went to the service when I became 18. North Catholic expanded and became a great community institution. It's now not too far away from where I'm at this place that I'm staying at.
And let me ask, Frank, when you went there, did you have nuns and priests as your teachers?
Oh, yes. We had, since it was a Catholic school, we had what they called brothers. They were the Brothers of Mary out of Dayton, Ohio. And the funny thing about it is, when I signed up for my freshman class and told them my name, Frank Mayer, they looked at me and with surprise, because there was a brother there whose name was Frank Mayer also. It was a real good surprise.
And tell me, Frank, I'm a teacher, so I have to ask, were you a well-behaved student?
Well, good and bad. You know, there's always a period in your life where no matter where you're at, that you do some goofy things. Yes. Unfortunately, we did a lot of things. For instance, at North Catholic, our days started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was done at 2. And the school was on top of a big hill on a place called Mount Troy Hill. And below it was H.J. Heinz factory, where they made relishes, ketchup, and mustard. And at one time, they were making cereal. And they had tours. And we would take off and go down at 2:30, and we would do the tour. No matter how many times we'd do the tour, and when it was over, they gave you a bowl of cereal with milk and whatever else they had. And it was a great young experience.
Very good. That's a great story. The students, of course, know the Heinz Company, but mainly for ketchup nowadays. And Max, let's go to you next. If you could ask number 4.
Good morning. What did you and your friends do for fun?
Well, I was in school I played intramural football and intramural softball, and I had a great experience in my education. I wouldn't trade it for all the dough and money in this world. What we had, we would play football, and what we would do was we would get the newspaper and roll the newspaper up to a 5/6 inch bob and wrap it with tape, and then that was our football, and we would throw that around, and then we would play catch and a lot of other games. When I got into my teens, we would go up on the hill, and everybody, one would bring the butter, someone would bring the potatoes, someone would bring the wood, and would start a fire, and we'd roast the potatoes and put butter and salt on our potatoes at night, and sit there and talk and have a good time.
That sounds very nice. We'll have a student ask another question, but let's go to, we'll go to Kai next. And Kai, if you could go ahead and ask number 5.
For sure. Thank you for being here, Mr. Meyer. How was your family affected by the Great Depression?
Everybody was affected by the Depression. What you did was you strived to do what needed to be done so that you had food, and there was no waste, because everything was costing money, and the Depression had a great unemployment history. Well, we moved away. I remember we moved to Detroit, Michigan, where my grandpap and all of the uncles and my aunt and my dad and my mother, we all moved to Hamtramck, Michigan, and they all got jobs in the Chevrolet automobile factory. But we only stayed there for like 2 years, and then we came back to my grandpap's house in Pittsburgh. Good.
Very good. Thank you for that. And of course, Frank, the war begins for Canada in 1939, begins for the United States in 1941. So you're going to school and you're a young teenager in the early part of the war. The students know a really big thing for Americans was the attack on Pearl Harbor. Can you tell the students what you remember from that?
I sure do. I was at 10 o'clock mass at our St. Gabriel's Roman Catholic Church on the north side of Pittsburgh. We were parishioners of that church, and the 10 o'clock mass laid out, and we started out, and all of a sudden whistles started blowing and horns started blowing, and everybody was wondering what happened. And here it was the notice that the Japanese had invaded Hawaii, and that we probably are in the war. And I remember that as clear as a bell when walking down the steps from the church, and everybody wondering what happened. And then a city policeman came and said that the Japanese had invaded Hawaii, and we're going to be in a big war. And that was in 1941.
And you, of course, were very young at that time still, Frank. I think you would have been about 14 years old.
But I was also fortunate in that when I was 12 years old, I started to work at a streamline market near me where I live. And one of the things that I was doing was I would get little brown bags, and I would fill them with half pounds of sugar, half pounds of coffee, half pounds of the tea. Everything was rationed. And then, of course, we had the little red tokens that when you bought food, you had to give a token beside your cash.
And the students are familiar with that, the rationing system that was created. So Darren is going to ask you a question now. Go ahead, Darren.
Good morning. Why did you
morning.
decide to enlist? How did your mother react?
I didn't enlist. When I turned 18, I was eligible for the draft, and I was drafted to the service. 2 weeks after I turned 18, I had to go for a physical, and I remember the sergeant patting me on my shoulder and saying, you did good, you passed all of the requirements, and you're going to be in the service. What do you want? Do you want the Army, the Navy, the Marines, or the Coast Guard? And I wasn't well versed in what was happening with the services, so I just said the Army. And 2 weeks later, I was on a train heading to Georgia and Camp Wheeler for infantry training.
Very good. And I'll have a student ask a question about that. So let's go to Ryan. If you could ask number 4 there, please.
So good morning. So why
Morning.
did you choose the
I went
so
for
why do you choose the Air Force?
I went for training to Camp Wheeler in Macon, Georgia. And it was a nice place. I only experienced one bad thing. After being there a month in training, a few of us decided to catch the bus to go to Atlanta and visit Atlanta, Georgia, and the bus was jammed. And when we got off, I reached my hand in the back of my left pocket to get my wallet, and someone picked my wallet. I will never forget that.
That's unfortunate for that to happen to you while you were in uniform. Sorry, Carolyn, you were going to prompt your dad. Go ahead.
I was, Dad. One of the other questions that Ryan was asking was, why did you choose the Air Force? Tell the students you were in, it was called the Army Air Corps back then, and tell them about how the Air Force came about.
I was an infantry rifleman. I went over to, we landed in Leyte. And I was there, and then after being there, I think it was maybe 3 months, the war ended. And then we were all there, and so that there was nobody and no fighting. So what you had to do then is you had to get into the confines, and I was selected to go to the orderly room. And when I was in the orderly room, then they made me a supply sergeant. And I was discharged as a supply sergeant. And I also signed up in 1946. When I come home, I signed up for three more years regular duty, because they said that we were to be in a war with some of the small countries, and it was Korea.
Okay.
So thank you for that, Frank. So that was a good overview for the students. We'll go back and ask a few questions to get a little more detail if we can. I'd love it, Frank, if you could tell the students a little bit about your training. What kind of training did you do when you went down to Georgia?
Well, my training was as an infantryman. You got a rifle, which you had to keep handy and clean, and we had all the training that you needed, and the training lasted for 3 months.
Tell them about how you learned to drive. Tell them that experience.
Oh, well, we'll get to that.
Go ahead.
How I did is I got my PFC, and then I was a corporal, and then I was a sergeant, and then they made me a company supply sergeant. I had and that's where I learned to drive. They brought a Jeep out, and we were on a mountain road, and the sergeant from the motor pool said, "Slide over, you have to drive." And I said, "I never drove." And he said, "You'll learn." And that's how I learned how to drive. I drove a Jeep, a weapons carrier, and a 6x, because I used the 6x. I had to go to the pick up everything that I needed to do at the quartermaster.
And let me ask one other question about the training, Frank. Of course, a very important part of training is discipline and learning to take orders and marching and all that kind of thing. How did you adapt to the Army way of life? Did you get into trouble at all?
None at all. When you are in the service and you signed up, you knew what was ahead of you. At least you should have known what was ahead of you, and you go into the situation and you make the best of everything that you can do. And that's what I did.
And you said, and I'm going to just prompt you a minute. You were telling me a story yesterday that I had never heard, that there was a senior officer that kind of mentored you and took you under his wing. And can you tell the students and Scott a little bit about him and how he watched over you?
Oh, well, that was he was a priest. He was a captain, and he would often come into my supply room and just sit down, and he would chat. And it was an experience that I often thought of, and I still sometimes think about because it was a very informative meeting, and that a captain and a priest would sit down and talk with me.
It's always good to have a mentor. There's one other thing you mentioned there I want to have the students ask a question about. So Salim, if you could go ahead and ask question number 8, please.
Good morning. So what was it like to go overseas, and what was the troopship like?
It was good. We got on a ship. It was the USS Grant, and we got on the ship, and there was like 1,500 of us on the ship. In fact, there was a soldier behind me alphabetically. My name was Mayer, and there was a man Mazza from Philadelphia, and him and I got into the prize ring aboard ship, and we both ended up just shaking hands after 3 rounds, and that it was nice. And we had a lot of good experiences with what was going on.
Tell them a little bit about on the ship, Daddy. You have some hearing problems now because of being on the ship, right?
No, not really.
No, you had said that
Yeah.
for being on the ship and them firing the guns, you had
Oh,
had some-
well, it was okay.
Okay.
Any other question?
Yeah, I'll ask a follow-up to that. So I just want to make sure the students understood that you said that you were boxing on the ship. Did you have any experience with boxing or fighting?
No, no. In fact, since my name is Mayer, there was a chap from Philadelphia called Medwick, and him and I were friends, and we stayed together and talked together, and he was a boxer. And what happened is when we got into the ring, he was helping me, telling me what I could do and how to defend myself. And it was an experience that I'll never forget.
Very good. And Frank, like I told you before, I'll do a couple of really quick screen shares for the students so they can see some of what you're talking about. So this is the USS Grant, the ship that you would have gone over on. And it looks like a fairly nice transport ship. Oftentimes they would use the Liberty ships that weren't very nice to be on, but this one was pretty good. What were the sleeping arrangements like?
Yes, it was very good. In fact, I'll tell you what we did. 3 of us went up while we were on the ocean. 3 of us went up to the bow of the ship, and we leaned over. We wanted to see how the ship dipped, and because the sea was rough, and the bow would dip and then raise up, and we saw the black and red lines on the bottom of the bow on the boat, and the captain hollered down. He used a swear word, and he said, "Get your backside away from air and down into your quarters." immediately. So that's what we did.
And Frank, tell the
We
students,
wanted to see how high the bow of the ship rose in rough water.
and Frank, tell the students what the sleeping arrangements were like. How many of you were in a cabin?
There was no cabins. What it was three three canvas
Were they cots?
a cot. Well, there was three cots, one on top of each other, and it had a canvas strung string that you laid on, and you had a pillow, and that was it. And the guy that's had number three had to climb over two to get up to the third deck,
So they were more like bunks rather than
and-
cots
and
on the ground.
because they needed a lot of room to fit 1,500 people to sleep and quartered.
Absolutely. And I'll show another image, and I'll stress to the students, this wasn't Frank, but you mentioned boxing on the ship. It was a relatively common pastime for soldiers and sailors on ships to create a boxing ring. And this one is obviously on a battleship. But here we have two young guys who maybe they were learning how to box as well, Frank.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that the Grant ship is that they put up a boxing net. And it had all four ropes around. And when the 3 minutes were up for the first round, you went to your corner, and you stood, you didn't sit or anything. And then they blew the whistle, and you went out, and you did another 3 minutes of boxing. It was an experience that I went through that I wouldn't exchange my experience for being in the service in any way. In fact, I was glad that when I was discharged, Leroy from Harrisburg and we both signed up for 3 years service.
And to be clear for the students, Frank, when you went to war, you went into the Pacific. So where did the troop ship go?
We caught the ship in Los Angeles, no, in Sacramento, because we were all anxious to see Alcatraz.
Oh, San Francisco.
When you pulled out of the shore, out of the to go into the Pacific, you passed Alcatraz, and everybody said Alcatraz, and that's where Al Capone was. I remember that. It's clear as a bell.
And from there, did you go to Pearl Harbor?
No, from there we went to Alaska, and we got into a 20-ship convoy, and we headed for the Philippines, and we were behind. If you notice that there was a picture of MacArthur getting in the water and going into the island of Leyte, that we took Leyte back. Well, we were all decked out, and we had to climb down a rope ladder on the side of the ship. First, you threw your duffel bag down, And then you get up and you took the rope ladder off the side of the ship, and you got into the knee-deep water and trudged your way to shore.
Very good. And I'll do another quick screen share because I just want to show a map of the Pacific, just so the students know the different areas that we are talking about. So students, you can see the tip of Alaska way up here. Obviously Hawaii over here, and the Philippines is way down here in Southeast Asia. Yeah, just north of what used to be called the Netherlands Indies and China and so forth. So just so you guys know the part of the world that we are talking about.
Right.
And Frank, can you share with the students some of your first impressions on arriving in the Philippines?
Well, the first thing is that we got into formation, and we had to find quarters to put our belongings in and get situated. And then from there on, then we went on patrol, and there are a lot of mountains in the Philippine Islands, especially on Leyte. And then I was on Palawan, and Palawan is one of the southernmost islands. In fact, it was just news on that our vice president visited the Philippines, and she stayed at a place on Palawan in the Philippines for her meeting. And it was a big island, and we were there. I was on I landed on Leyte, then I went to Cebu, island of Cebu, then from Cebu to Palawan, and then up to the main island in the Philippines, to a place called Florida Blanco.
And I heard you mention, Frank, that you would go out on patrols. Can you tell the students what you were looking for on those patrols?
We were looking for any enemies that were holed up, because what they would do is they would get on an island, and there was almost all the Philippine Islands had terrain that was hilly, and the Japanese would dig tunnels, and that's where they would stay. And to your surprise, if you walked up, even after the war ended, they were coming out of the holes in the mountains and trying to get in chow line. Every once in a while you'd hear, watch ya, they would say, watch ya. There's the way they used to say it is, hey, there's a Jap in the chow line. I know saying the Jap instead of Japanese, but I had to say how what we did do. You would say there's a Jap in the chow line.
And tell me, Frank, the students know, in class we talked about how some Japanese soldiers were hiding even until the 1970s in a few cases. A lot
Oh,
of them
yeah.
refused to
Oh, yeah.
surrender. Do you remember having any, incidents or problems with Japanese soldiers?
Oh, yeah. We had soldiers that would come out of their caves in the mountains and try to sneak in the chow line, or they would try to sneak in to different places to find new hiding and that.
Did any of them did any of them come into your camp and surrender or?
No, none of them surrendered willingly. They didn't just come up and it was by chance that you would see them and they would come out and all of a sudden you'd see someone coming out of the backgrounds and you knew that they were Japanese.
And Max had a question he wanted to ask about that. Go ahead, Max.
So, what were your thoughts on the Japanese and what were you taught about them?
Well, I don't remember ever. It was at that time the Japanese were our enemy, and they had a big force. When you'd say they had like 350 airplanes in the air going to Hawaii and all of the other islands and that, and they were our enemy at that time. However, they war, the United States won, and there was peace arranged, and to this day we are friendly and accept the Japanese nation.
Very good. Thank you for that. I was curious about that, Frank, because of course you grew up during the war and you would have learned about the fighting that was happening in the Pacific. And the Japanese had developed a reputation for being, ferocious fighters. They wouldn't surrender. Did you learn about that kind of thing? Like, did you hear about the battles at places like Iwo Jima?
Oh, yes. It's the same with our troops. Everybody that was in action of any kind, the only thing you had on your mind was that you wanted to be the victor instead of the victim.
You mentioned before, Frank, that you became a supply sergeant. Can you tell the students what your duties were on base, what your job was?
Oh, my job was to dispense clothing and other things to the troops as they required. If you needed shoes or clothes, and you did everything that needed to be done in maintaining the grounds where you were. I know that I was responsible for a lot of things that were going on.
And you did tell me that you would go into town and you would sometimes trade some of your stuff for items that you needed back at camp, correct?
Oh, well, we would trade with the Navy. I remember in Palawan, especially because it was one of the southernmost islands of the Philippines. And if you ran out of things, you try to trade with the Navy for what you had that they wanted, and they had what you wanted, so you swapped. I know that like Major Dawson, I got a hospital bed and mattress for him because I had to trade some shoes and clothing to get his bed and mattress and pillow in the hospital, a white hospital bed.
And Emma had a related question there.
Did you meet any of the local people, and did you deal with them at all?
Many local people.
Oh, yes, we met a lot of local people. In fact, the local people, a lot of them needed all kind of help for food and water, and you had to feel sorry for the people. They had very small amounts of food, and like I went into one house and the mother was feeding her baby and she needed food, and I left some canned food for her so that they had something to eat. When you got to the outskirts of the different places, like when I got to the main island, I went to a place called Florida Blanca, and there was a church there that had skulls on the altar, and their belief was that after the person was in the ground for so long, they would remove the skull and put it on the altar. And we were like, we couldn't believe what we were looking at. But it was a great experience, and there's nothing in the world that could ever have changed my mind to what I experienced.
Can you tell Scott and the students a story they might be surprised about? Tell them about Queenie and Zambo, and tell them about taking Queenie for an airplane ride.
Oh, well,
Those, I think they'd enjoy those two stories.
we had two dogs, and when the owners of the two dogs were going to leave to go back to the States, I ended up with two dogs called Queenie and a little puppy dog that was her puppy called Sambo, because he was born on the island of Samboango. They called him Zambo. And Queenie, Major Dawson, commander of our platoon, he had a B-25 bomber plane that he flew, and he took Queenie and me. We were flying up to Manila, and Queenie got up to 30,000 feet, and she got gas, and it was the worst thing that you ever wanted to be in. And there was no windows to open.
That was a great story. Thank you for prompting that, Carolyn. Anything like that, definitely.
I thought it would add some levity.
Absolutely. Rob, I sent you a question a moment ago. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. So what were the conditions like on the base what was the weather like?
Oh, conditions were all right, were good. The weather was always good. You had your rainy spells, and you just lived with it there. And you, what it was if it rained when you were in the service and you had to do something, you did it in the rain, and that was the way you did it. When you're in enemy territory, you don't care. You never say, "Oh, it's raining, I can't go out." When you're there and you're doing a job, you do it whether it's rain or snow or whatever. It's the job that needs to be done.
Very good.
That okay?
Absolutely. I imagine that the weather in the Philippines was quite different from what you were used to in Pittsburgh.
Oh, yes. It was always 90, 92 degrees, no matter where you were.
And we'll have Darren ask a question. Excuse me, Darren, if you could ask number 16.
Did you receive letters or packages from home very often? What did they say or include?
Did you receive any packages from home? And what
Oh.
what was in packages that you?
Oh, yes, we received packages. Yeah, you receive packages from home. Maybe maybe once every some of the troop got a package every month. Some I'd get a package from home maybe every 3 months. And what it was my mother made nut roll and some kind of little cookies, and you always got that, and you got tea bags in the mail, and that, and it was good. One thing is, you never starved. Everything was always up to date, and you had plenty to eat and live on.
Very good. And so the students understand the chronology. Of course, Frank, you turn 18 as the war is getting close to its end. You went overseas, I believe you said in March of 1945.
Right.
And the war in Europe ended about 2 months later. Do you remember learning the news about Hitler's suicide and Germany surrendering?
Oh, yes. That was news everywhere. Oh, yeah. We would sit by the radio and listen to what was going on. We would sit in. There was always a radio in some of the orderly rooms or in the supply room to tell you what's going on.
And another big event, a sad one for Americans, would have happened while you were overseas. Do you remember learning the news about Franklin Roosevelt's death?
Yes, I did. Yeah, everybody was shocked that he died. And then it was the same thing again. Everybody was wondering how it was going to happen that the vice president is going to take over, Mr. Truman.
We'll have Darren ask a follow-up on that. Darren, look at the chat.
Do you remember learning about the atomic bombs?
Oh, yes. yeah, everything that they were doing, because we thought that the big on the big island of Manila, Luzon, there was a place called Clark Field, and Clark Field had all the B-17s and B-25 bombers and airplanes on it. In fact, I can remember to this day pouring down rain and getting under a wing of a B-25 to get out of the rain a little bit, but the wind blew the rain underneath. You got wet whether you wanted to, so you went down and you tried to get to the hub of the plane to get a cover to keep dry. Oh yeah, that was in Clarkfield in the big island of Luzon, that is the capital of the Philippines.
So Frank, when you learned about the Japanese surrender, did you guys have a big party or anything like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I can remember. We had green beer from Australia in cans. Oh yeah, yes, and everybody had a beer. I remember sitting in my tent in my quarters and in a web and chair and having a beer. Oh yeah. One thing it did was one of the things my duties were that I had to ice down the beer, so when the pilots come in, they would all come to the supply room and sit down and gab and have a beer.
And I want to ask about the green beer. Was it supposed to be green?
Well, it wasn't ripe yet, but it was regular beer, but it was called green beer because it wasn't aged.
Okay, I was curious about that. Of course, the students wouldn't know what color beer is supposed to be. That's why I had to ask that.
No, beer is beer, but we called it green beer because it wasn't aged and it was just made and canned and shipped right out.
Okay. And of course, the war comes to an end in the Pacific, Frank, in September 1945. And I want to ask a little bit about the end of the war, but Carolyn, I would say at this point, if there's other stories that you know about your dad's time overseas, feel free to prompt us. But Frank, maybe you can tell us about what the next stop was for you. When did you come back to the United States?
I come back to the United States in October of 1945, and my buddy from Harrisburg and I, we both decided we went to Fort Dix to be released, and while we were at Fort Dix, they told us that the lieutenant that was talking to us said that we would like to have as many people from this part here sign up, because we expect that we're going to be in another war in probably 4 or 5 years with some of these small little countries, and it was Korea And so Leroy and I signed up for 3 years, and we'd go to Sawmill Run Boulevard here, and they used to have a place to go for your monthly tours. But everything was good.
So you were in the reserves then for a
I
number
was-
of years.
I was in the reserves.
And when you were in the reserves, Frank, were you back in the Pittsburgh area then?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I went to school then. I went to Robert Morris, got an education in accounting.
So when you came back, Frank, were you able to take advantage of the GI Bill benefits?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The GI Bill was available to every soldier that served in the service. And if they didn't take advantage, it was a good thing that they passed up.
And of course, during those years, Frank, when you were in the reserve, I guess that would be 1946 to 1949 or so. That's when the Cold War got started. Do you remember, following the news there about the Soviet Union and so forth?
Oh, yes. When you went to your monthly meetings, and that you were informed as to what was going on and what you needed to do. That was always on the forefront. Yeah.
Excellent. We've been talking about that in class quite a bit lately, how the Cold War started to escalate and how the post-war situation deteriorated. So, Frank, during the years that you were in the reserves, that's when you were going to college, I take it.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
And you became an accountant, and I take it that's what you went to
Yeah.
go on to do as your career?
yes. And I always say that I did the right thing, and I enjoyed being extra 3 years that I spent, and it made a big difference in my thinking about what we were doing.
And Ryan had a question he wanted to ask. Go ahead, Ryan.
Did you go to Korea?
No, I missed Korea because Korea started in full force in 50, and my enlistment was over in 49. When I signed up for 3 years for 47, 48, and 49. And they were calling everybody up on the 50th from the 1950 on.
Okay, and Kai had a question. Go ahead, Kai.
Hi, Mr. Meyer. I was wondering if you were always confident in an American victory during the war, because I've studied history a little bit, and I know that during like the first year or so, Japan made a lot of really quick victories. So I wanted to know if you thought maybe at some point Japan was actually going to win the war.
That's a really great question, and I'm going to paraphrase if you don't mind. So what he was asking was, because as the war started and so on, Japan made some very significant and quick victories. At any time, did you think that the United States, or that we were not going to win the war? Did you think that the Japanese would defeat us?
Well, yeah, especially when you're talking about take Iwo Jima. Do you realize how many troops we lost on Iwo Jima? Because that was one of the the big battles of the Pacific. And we came out as winners, and we got Okinawa, but we could have lost Okinawa also. Oh yeah, absolutely. That was good question. We were very fortunate that we defeated the Japanese on Okinawa and took it over.
And that was a very serious battle at the end of the war. Given that, I'm also curious, Frank, the time that you grew up through, you might have had friends, you know, who were a year or two older or whatever. Did you have any friends or maybe people from your school who were lost during the war, who were killed in different places?
Oh yes, we had people lost from high school that were there, and I remember the first casualty that we had at North Catholic, and he was killed in Germany. Oh yes.
That's
Yeah.
a reality of the time period. Do you remember that boy's name by chance, Frank?
No, it said the name Sylvester keeps crawling to my mind, but I'm not sure that it was.
Okay, and I think, Frank, we're just about done. I have one other question I'll have a student ask. So Salim, if I could get you to ask the very last one, number 2 at the very end.
Okay.
What do you think about on Veterans Day?
Oh, good question. We wanted to know on Veterans Day, what things do you think about on Veterans Day?
I think of Veterans Day, the time that I had in the service, but mostly about how many troops we lost and that had been killed in serving the country. And a lot of people just take the day as a day off, but the people that were instrumental in us defeating the Japanese, and they died in their service. I say a thanks for them and a prayer.
Very good. And Carolyn, was there something? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know, unfortunately, I couldn't get many pictures to you. The one thing that I wanted to show the students that I have with me today is this is a copy of a Life magazine. I'm sorry, Dad, maybe you can help me hold it up.
Well, that's okay. We can see it okay.
Can you see it okay? So that's a copy of a Life magazine from 1985, commemorating 40 years after World War II that my dad has saved. And also, I did not send it in time, but I did email you this morning a photo. We're fortunate enough that Dad still has his uniform. And I sent you a picture of it this morning that maybe you can share with the students when you're finished.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take a look for that. I'll also screen share right now real quickly the photo that you did send. And Frank, this is you right here, the tall guy out of everybody there. But these are some of your family members. And I noticed they're almost all in uniform. So I'd love it if you could tell the students a little bit about this photograph and who we're looking at.
You go from the left.
The soldier on my right side is my Uncle Mike, and he served. He was a butcher in his civilian life, and he became a butcher and clerk, a cook at Baltimore Ordnance Plant. And then that's me. And then my uncle Julius in the middle, he was in World War I. And then there's Uncle Joe next to him, and he served in Panama. And then this was my uncle Victor, and he was in Japan. He was much later. I think he was inducted into the service in the 50s. And then that's my grandpap. He was the father of Uncle Mike, Julius, Joseph, and Victor.
And that's that was your mom's.
That was
dad
my
and
mom's.
her brothers.
That was my mother's brothers, and my mother's father, Michael.
Very good. Well, it's a fantastic photo.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
I see all the students up there, and I think that it's great that we have young people that are interested in what was going on and the battles and the war that we had.
Very much so. And they and I are pleased to be here, as are the other people in the room.
And I say thank you to you that I had an opportunity to talk to you. And I hope that some of the questions asked that I answered properly.
Absolutely. And last thing I'll ask from the students, and adults in the room can join in as well if you like. If everybody could unmute, and Frank, on the count of 3, we're going to give you a nice big thank you. So 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
Scott.
you for very
And
much.
Thank
for,
you to all the students.
And I'll let the students go now, but there are a few adults in the room. I see Captain Mort Lightstone down there. So adults in the room, if you guys want to hang around for a second, you can say a quick hello to Frank. But students, you guys go ahead and sign out, and make sure you share your document with me and check your email in a little bit. Bye, guys.
I thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Frank. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Everybody,
Frank.
have a good one.
The students very quickly took off. Frank, I'd like to give you a special thank you. I served for 28 years. I'm now confined to a very fine veterans retirement place in Toronto, Canada.
I enjoyed.
Thank you for your service.
I
Well,
enjoyed 5 years.
It seems like it all happened yesterday. I know, Frank, what you were telling us is so important for the students to hear. It's and the story that will go on forever.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your service also.
Thank you very much for your 28 years of service.
And we also have that's Captain Mort Lightstone. He's in Toronto with me. He's come to the school many times. Mort was in the Air Force during the Korean War and has just very compelling stories about that conflict. We're also joined by Douglas and Teresa Brady, who are in New Hampshire, and Malcolm Cook, who is joining us from England as it happens. He connected me to a World War II veteran in Hastings, if I remember correctly. Do I remember that right?
Right.
Oh, Malcolm, you're on mute right now.
It was
yeah, that was we lost him last year. He went right through World War II, from D-Day right through into Germany. And unfortunately, we lost him last year, but just like yourself, he had many fond memories, both of the war, unfortunately, and thereafter. So thank you very much for your talk today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a
And
pleasure
Malcolm, God save
being
the
able to talk to you.
And Mort, I think I heard you say, God save the king to Malcolm there.
Yes, I was up early this morning. I watched the ceremony, very emotional, very elaborate, quite different from installing a president of the United States or a president of a veterans organization. To watch, and
We
it
also were up.
added a touch of loyalty when it was needed here in Canada.
Absolutely. And Doug and Teresa, if you wanted to say a quick hello to Frank.
Yes, I want to thank you. My dad was a POW in World War II.
From the Mighty Eights.
Yeah, for the Mighty Eights.
He was
Yeah,
shot down.
wow.
He was shot down on the first daytime raid over Berlin.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
so,
Thank you for his
Well,
service, and
And
thank you for participating in the interview with us.
no,
No.
thank you.
yeah, I've got all the letters that were sent to him as a POW.
Wow.
That's got to be an incredible story, but
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing this, Carolyn. I will make sure to send you a copy of that group photo in a little bit. And as always, the students and I will send you a DVD and everything in about a month or so. So you'll have a record of this too.
Perfect. I
thank
have
you very
two
much,
brothers, and our
and-
families looking
and-
forward to hearing the interview.
And Frank, it was so nice to talk to you. You guys all have a nice day, and we
Bye,
will be in touch.
Thank you
All
very-
right, thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
All of you,
Bye.
all
Goodbye.
of you, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Frank.